Welcome to the Plant a Trillion Trees podcast. I'm Eva Monheim.
And I'm Hal Rosner. We are both certified arborists through the International Society of Arboriculture. The purpose of our podcast is to encourage tree planting and proper tree care for our urban forests, which include neighborhoods, parks, and other open spaces.
We will also cover a myriad of tree topics, including the important role trees play in relationship to the climate crisis. Thank you for joining us.
Verdant Earth Educators provides dynamic in-person training and online learning opportunities for environmental and horticultural businesses. Owned by ISA-certified arborists and former university faculty, the Verdant Earth Educator team provides consultations on tree care and recommends climate-resilient opportunities for your valued green spaces. Verdant Earth Educators is all about seeding knowledge for success. Find Verdant Earth Educators at verdanteartheducators.com.
Monheim Microphones designs and handcrafts top-tier studio microphones and preamps right here in the United States in Hollywood, California. Their incredible line of innovative microphones and designs are used around the world by everyone from podcasters to top-charting record producers and singers. They recently released their new royalty microphone, Monheim Microphones Unparalleled Excellence, monheimmicrophones.com. This podcast is being recorded on March 8th, 2024. Cliff Drouet is a forester with the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, and Enforcement, OSMRE for short, which is a federal agency under the Department of the Interior. Cliff is working with the Appalachian Regional Reforestation Initiative, the ARRI. The program restores old surface mine sites throughout Appalachia by planting native seedlings and establishing wildlife habitats. The restoration program was started in 2004 by OSMRE, and it has evolved into a highly successful program with good seedling survivability and growth. Having native trees growing on old mine sites greatly improves air, water, and soil quality, while providing wildlife habitat and recreation benefits on the site. The ARRI program partners with private landowners, federal and state agencies, nonprofits, academia, and corporations to restore old mine sites back to native forests across Appalachia. Cliff graduated from Louisiana Tech University in 1980 with a BS in Forest Management, and he is a member of the Society of American Foresters. His professional background includes working as a procurement forester for 11 years in the industrial sector, then worked as a consulting forester for 25 years. And in 2016, he began working as a federal forester in Kentucky. Cliff is a proud military veteran who served for 36 years and completed 4 combat tours. Welcome to the Plant a Trillion Trees podcast, Cliff. We're delighted that you could be with us today.
Well, thank you. I'm very honored to be invited.
Well, we've had you on before on episode 87, and we were fascinated with the work that you were doing and are doing. And it seems that the extent of your work keeps expanding. And we were wondering if you can talk a little bit about those endeavors that you're doing. And can you give us an idea of how many acres you've actually, not single-handedly, because I know you work with volunteers, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, but how many acres do you think you have reforested on those old coal mines?
Good question. A little bit of background. So the ARRI program, the Appalachia Region Reforestation Initiative, was started in 2004. So bringing it up. So in the 20 years, I'm going to make an educated guess on the acreage because I'm not quite sure of all of them. But in 7 Appalachian states, starting from the Pennsylvania-New York border, going all the way down to Tennessee-Alabama border, we're probably right at 700,000 acres, somewhere in that neighborhood. I don't think I will have missed it much. But let me just tell you, that's including the coal companies, and they are planting trees on those old mine sites instead of the grass. So That's a huge advancement. All right. So I'm a forester, so I don't get involved with the active mining. That's with the mine inspectors, and they've got good rapport, and the coal companies they're on board with this. So where I'm focused is with private landowners, the majority of that, and that would be with the abandoned mine lands and legacy mines. So in 1977, when President Carter signed the surface mining law, that's when the line was drawn. So everything that happened pre-1977, the official signing up after 1977, they call it abandoned mine lands, which really covers both sides of that timeline, if you will. So we're focused mainly on trying to go back and educate landowners of grass and briars and kudzu and this jungle of junk. Well, then we got to plant, and we can plant native trees, and you're producing a timber crop future for your children and mainly grandchildren. And while we're doing that, we're also building and providing wildlife habitat. So you can have multiple things going on at one time. You can have songbirds, you can have pollinator habitat, you can have all the wild critters, deer, turkey, quail, all of that. And you can sow that in a grass, like a clover type mix. That's wildlife habitat. It's also your fire breaks. So, those roads provide multiple benefits as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And so if you think about how many trees are planted per acre, how many trees do you think you plant per acre? I'm going to see if I can calculate this out while we're talking.
So we plant approximately 700 trees, seedlings, per acre. And a seedling, we try to go for the 1-year-old bare root seedling, which are about the size of a pencil, anywhere between 14 and 18 inches tall. Little bitty. And we hand plant all of these, but we don't use machinery, tractors, drones. We don't do any of that. We hand plant those. So anyway, we're planting, and we plant them on an 8 foot by 8 foot spacing, which gives you the 700 trees per acre. And the reason we use that 8 foot by 8 foot is because the bulldozers that we use with those big ripper shank, that's a plow on the rear end of the dozer, we typically have 2 of those ripper shanks or plows, and those are situated right behind the tracks of the dozer, which is approximately 8 feet apart. So that's what gives you your 8 foot by 8 foot spacing.
Okay. So I calculated it would be almost 500 million trees that you've planted.
Yeah, and that would be everybody, all partners. You got pollen.
Yeah.
Yes, so you've got, go ahead.
That's incredible to be able to plant that many trees, knowing that we're destroying so many, tornadoes coming through or storms coming through or whatever it is that we're losing. It's incredible that your organizations have done that much. And I want to tell our listeners, and I want to point this out to them, that if they go to www.osmre.gov/programs/ARRI, they can find out what's happening all throughout the regions of the country, right where you are.
They can go to that site and they can look at, we've got it by date, we've got it by place, we've got it by the state and kind of the closest county or city where that mine site is being restored. And so if you see something that kind of catches your eye and you go, oh, that's going to be during Arbor Month, which is now, or that's going to be close to Earth Day, which is April 22nd. Well, I might like to go do that. And so when I mentioned Earth Day, the big one is going to be at Flight 93, which is in Pennsylvania, where the plane crashed on 9/11 near Shanksville. And that's on a national park. That's the Flight 93 National Monument Park. All right. So anyway,
that's Earth Day, right? You said?
And so it's the weekend closest to Earth Day.
Okay.
That's how they do that. And so if anybody has questions, my contact information is on that website. And they can email me and say, Cliff, how do we volunteer? I'd like to bring my scout troop, my environmental science class, my homeschool group, whatever you've got. Send me a note, give me a call, and I'll try to answer your questions.
Yeah, see, I think that that's really wonderful that you can galvanize large groups of people and they can actually see how this is done, how reclamation is done through the planting of trees. And we were talking the last episode, I had asked you about Miyawaki, the Miyawaki method, and that is kind of going gangbusters right now. It's planted on 18-inch centers. And I wanted to find out, when you go back to visit your woodlands, what do you see and I know you could speed your process up for making a woodland. What do you see like after a couple years of planting? What is the visual that you're going to see?
When you go back about 2 years, that's a good question, Eva. You go back 2 years later and you're going to see an explosion. That's what the term I like to use. You're going to see regrowth of grass, both native and non-native grasses, because all of those seeds were in that soil and they were invisible. And so when you cross rip it and scratch all that up, you activate those seeds. They have contact with the soil, or they've dropped into one of those furrows or ruts. So now they've got soil, they got sunlight, and they got rain and moisture. It's game on. Mom Nature has turned the switch on. So we go back, and you go back around June or July, Eva, when everything is leafed out, and you can pick up the rows of trees that look like little soldiers in formation. And then you also see all of the vines and grass and little shrubs that are popping up. That's when I go back and I do my survivability plots, and I'm checking to see how many of trees do we have that survive per acre. And I'm also measuring them to see what their growth is. So in 2 years, Eva, they ought to be just about waist high or almost there.
Wow.
You know, Mom Nature's throwing curveballs at you all the time. You've got drought, you've got late season frost or snowfall. The snowfall is not as bad on the trees because it actually kind of blankets them, but it's the hard freeze in late spring that, you know, it nips the little buds and the leaves on them. Those die. And the other thing is deer browse. So when all those little trees open up, especially your hardwoods, that's the buffet bar for the deer. That's their browse. You know, they go through there and just fatten up on our little trees.
Right. Now, when you're going through and you see some native shrubs coming up, do you leave those?
Yeah. So what we do, if your young trees, the row of the planted trees, if they're being choked out by vines and invasive grass, and then, you know, briars aren't so bad unless they cover up the tree, but kudzu is bad. We'll mix a herbicide mix and we backpack spray that, because after that site has been ripped or plowed, you don't want any more vehicles on it. We go right down the row of trees and you just spray the row of trees and don't worry about the middles. And that just gives that tree about a 2-year head start above the competition, because you can't stop it. Mom Nature's going to come back.
So you can find other things like maybe latent seed that was in the soil that might not be grasses. It might be a shrub. It might be even another tree.
Absolutely. Because those, especially your smaller seeds, Eva, they're blown in by the wind, washed in with rain or by drainage. And also they come in on animals, not only in their fur, but also when they poop out there.
Yeah, and their hooves too.
Well, in their hooves, yes. It's caught in the mud in their hooves or paws. You're exactly right.
Yeah, depending on who. I know I used to have a wolf hybrid, and he used to always get acorns stuck in his paws and come home and eat them afterwards. I always used to laugh at that. I said, wow.
Birds are some of the biggest because they can fly for miles, and they'll have seeds on their web feet or on their feet or in their beaks or in their digestive system. And, you know, so they spread good seeds and bad seeds, you know, the invasive.
Right. Yes, depending on where they've been, right?
That's correct.
That's why it's so important that we have to be careful of our invasive species that are out there. And the guano, it's a nice fertilizer packet, so it actually helps those invasives even more so.
You're exactly right. There's some hardy species.
Yes. So you go back and look at your former plantings, and then what happens after that, the process after that? Do you go back a couple times or you just go back the one time?
No, I try to go back a couple of times. I'll go back that first summer just to see how things are, you know, if you've got an invasion or an explosion of the invasive species, then you're going to have to do some herbicide work that summer. If it's not that bad, then I'm looking to make sure trees are leafing out, trees are or at least starting to come on up, and then I come back the second summer. That's when the truth is going to be there. Do you have an invasive herbicide problem, or are the trees going to be able to outgrow this on their own? And then I try to come back at about age 7 or 8, somewhere in there, because those trees, even at age 7, they ought to be looking me right in the eye.
Okay, so that's a pretty sizable tree by then.
It is. And if they got stunted for whatever reason by drought or by animal browse or something, they will be a little shorter, but at least the dominant trees, they're coming on. And as soon as they get up 8, 9 feet tall and their limbs start branching out and dropping leaves, that's going to snuff out all that invasive grass and stuff.
Right. And the other thing, too, is I'm thinking you have them on 8-foot center. So I would imagine after 7 years and they're staring you in the face, the branches have to be at least 3 to 4 feet long, or maybe not quite, but they're almost filling in that gap of 8 feet.
That's exactly right. So between shading out your competition and dropping leaves, that's how the trees handle the competitive herbicides.
And if you have pines there, the needles, because they're so thin and they create that real carpety effect, that's really good for the floor of the forest.
It is, and they're acidic.
And they're acidic, exactly. So you had talked the last time that you were on about the different types of species that you were planting, and depending on the ecosystem that you're working within. But a lot of those areas, you have the chestnut oak, you've got white oak, you have a whole host of upland species. What other plants are you planting?
So what I try to do, Eva, is I try to mimic the native species that are growing around that mine site, all right? So you've got your red oak family, you've got your white oak family, and you just mentioned one like a chestnut oak. Then you've got your pines. Depending on where you are in Appalachia, if you're in central and northern Appalachia, you're looking at eastern white pine. If you're south, like East Kentucky going south, you can have shortleaf pine. And right around East Kentucky is where the two species kind of blend over one another. So you can plant the two species. I don't have to plant Virginia pine because it's going to show up from those birds we talked about anyway. And I'm not opposed to planting some red cedars here and there. And I mix them all up when we plant them. We also plant the shagbark hickory, which is a good species for your bats.
Yes, absolutely, because of the bark.
Yes, it curls, and that's shade for those bats in the summertime.
It's so interesting. When I talk to my students about shagbark hickory, what other bird likes to use it, or other winged creature, is a hummingbird. They like it because it's easy and it's tiny, they can build their tiny little nest in them. And it really fascinates me that tree attracts so many different animals to it because of the bark.
Yep. It's a host tree for a lot of wildlife, and the bats and the hummingbirds, they can hide under that curled bark, not only to get away from the sun and the rain, but it gets them away from the hawks.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't think of that.
Yep, because you got predators from above.
And I'm sure there's other smaller birds, too, that would utilize that little awning, if you will, for protection. I always think of, where do the animals go? And I'm sure the insects go under there, too, to get protected as well. But somebody just posted a picture of a squirrel during a rainstorm. And I was laughing so hard when I saw this picture. It was a picture of the squirrel, his butt end up against the trunk of the tree, and his tail curled over his head to protect him from the rain. And it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. I was laughing. I said, animals are so industrious, and if they have the right location, they can really protect themselves well.
Oh, they can adapt.
It's marvelous. It's marvelous.
So some of the trees that we plant, you mentioned American chestnut. Yes, we are a strong partner of the American Chestnut Foundation.
Right.
And the black walnuts, we plant those in their growth range. Usually you don't have to plant red maple because it's going to come in naturally anyway. But
right.
Your sugar maple and your silver maples, not so much. Now, they are hardy trees. They can survive on a plowed up mine site, but you need to plant them there. Your yellow poplar, we'll plant them. And then for your wildlife species, we'll plant persimmons, wild plum, black cherry. And those are usually kind of early risers. They grow quick as well. And after about your 5th or 6th year, they're producing fruit and nuts.
The being first successional plants or first successional trees, that actually helps to shade, or I don't want to say shade, but create a canopy very quickly for the other trees to benefit from. I would imagine that that's classic. And also, when you're saying food, if the birds come to eat the cherries, then they're also dispersing the seed in that same location. And so the strategy is a good one. The plum, Prunus virginiana, that's a shorter tree, but it's a good understory tree. That's a really good one. That to me is an art, to be able to create a woodland and come back and look at it and see the parallel between the other native forests around there. You're getting a really good visual of how maybe those forests started to develop.
That's true. When we plant, just so you listeners understand, we don't plant a whole row of shortleaf pine and a row of red oak. We mix them up so when the tree planters are filling their tree bags on their hips, truly a mixed bag of trees. So when they're pulling one out of the bag, they just pull a tree.
That's really a clever idea too, I wonder if that's where they got the term mixed bag.
It could be, or it may have come from a candy store. I'm not sure.
Oh, that could be too.
Another good tree we plant, Eva, is a black locust.
Oh, that's a great one.
It is. It's a nitrogen fixer because it produces seeds in a seed pod like a bean. And of course, as you know, each limb, when it's of age to start producing seed in those pods, my gosh, there can be 100 seed pods per limb. I mean, that tree is prolific.
Well, years ago when we were traveling back and forth to Pittsburgh to visit my former husband's family out there, we would notice that the old slag mines would be covered with black locust from top to bottom. And they weren't purposely planted. They came on their own.
Yeah, those seeds were in the soil.
Yes. And what's really fascinating about that particular tree, and I know a lot of people say, oh, it's a black locust. Well, not only is it rot resistant, but the flowers have the most amazing fragrance and they attract a ton of pollinators.
Exactly.
So you're getting you're already starting to create that important habitat that is so necessary. We have the birds coming in, the animals, but we have to also have those pollinators that would be, ground dweller, bees, what have you. That's also critical for habitat. And I just love the fact that you're talking about black locust because it is such an important tree here in Pennsylvania.
It is. And we try to create different levels of habitat. So like on those old road beds, I'll get out my chest cedar. I'll sling out grass seed with your red clover, your white clover, and your crimson clover, plus some other species that can grow on those sites, not only on the top of the road, but also on the sides, and that prevents erosion. But that also is your kind of like your ground layer for pollinator habitat. Then your grasses come up 2-3 as high as 3 feet high, and then also your trees, and that's like your next layer. And then as your trees get higher, they push up the third level, which is going to be your top story habitat.
Right. And then in between whatever other seeds that we were talking about, like your shrubs will come up on their own from the seed bank that's there. And they were talking about, how long can seeds stay in soil depending on the type of plant it is. But some seed can last 100 years in soil and others decades. So once the mines are gone and you do this crust ripping, you're opening up a whole new habitat again, plus with what you're planting, which is really, I think, remarkable.
We do that ripping with the bulldozer and those ripper shanks. And what that does is that fractures that hard packed ground or that hard pan.
Right.
Because otherwise, Eva, it'd be like trying to plant bare root trees on a Walmart parking lot.
Well, that's really something because they were talking about that yesterday at the Bartlett Day at the Philadelphia Flower Show about how ground, when it's really compacted, you really have to do some serious disturbance to get it opened up and to allow things to grow again. Not only that, but you also, when it becomes so hard, you're getting so much runoff into your streams that creates a real critical problem downstream for those people who are living downstream and, of course, animal habitat, etc. The question I have for you is, Cliff, what kind of new partnerships do you create over time with what you're doing? And what are some of the reactions of those partnerships that you have with different organizations? I'd be really interested in finding that out.
In fact, this year, I've been building some good partnerships ever since I hired on with the Office of Surface Mining. And that was in October of 2016. And now we've got some good partnerships with equipment companies because they want to get involved. They're involved in the mine land reclamation, pushing, huge dozers and scrapers and pans and that type thing, pushing all the big rock back in the hole and all that kind of stuff. But they want to be involved with the planting back in native trees, which I think is just amazing. And we've got Komatsu, we've got John Deere. Other companies are inquiring. I expect them to be, if we talk next spring, I have a feeling they'll be on board. And one of the trees that you mentioned earlier is the white oak. We are very strong supporters of the longleaf pine initiative, the shortleaf pine initiative, and the white oak initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And the white oak is not only lumber and wildlife and furniture, but it's also what they make bourbon barrels out of.
Right. And I remember you talking about that the last time you were on, and how, a lot of people don't know a lot of this information. And to share it, I think, is really important because those white oak trees create a flavor in a bourbon that most people don't realize, especially if they're burned on the inside, slightly burned with a torch, and then the bourbon's poured into it.
And aged. Yeah, they're charred and aged. Yep.
Yep.
And you can only use that barrel once for bourbon.
For bourbon, but then it could be used for other things.
Oh, yes, ma'am, it can. And that's a very hot market, is used bourbon barrels.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that either.
Oh, yeah, for beer, for wine, for rum, not only here in the U.S., but all around the world, because American white oak, just to share a little bit of info about the White Oak Initiative, that was started because all of those old white oak trees that are prime for making barrels, they're getting short. They've been whittling on them for 60 or 70 years or more, and you just don't have 70 and 80-year-old trees on every acre. You don't. And so what we're doing with the ARRI program is we partnered with the White Oak Initiative, and we plant a percentage of white oak, so many per acre, but we're not taking ag land or anything out of production. We're taking barren mine lands and putting it back into forestry production. And anyway, long story short, we've got a Beam Suntory company has partnered with the ARRI program, and on 2 projects, that's kind of a pilot project, one of these first one out the gate, see how it all works out kind of thing. But so far it's been amazing. And so the Beam Distillery Company decided on 2 projects, that's approximately 160 acres between the 2 of them. They bought 700 trees per acre for this 160 acres, and they donated the trees to the project.
Oh, see, that's really wonderful.
And that's a native mix of trees. I wrote the species, so it's not one straight order for white oak. It's just like we talked about. It's species that are growing naturally around those 2 mine sites.
It kind of reminds me of, when the great Cathedral Notre Dame burned. Yeah. And they said, well, they're not concerned about getting wood because when the cathedral was first built, they created a forest with oak to replenish any time that the cathedral needed to be refurbished for any reason. The oak trees would be there to use, and they were over 800 years old when they went to get them. And before they even cut those, they already started planting another forest to use for wood again. So that's the kind of thing we kind of need to do for our industries here, and creating these healthy woodlands where they're not stripped bare every time, but certain ones are taken out because they're being used for something. And I think that kind of careful planning goes a long way because you're maintaining habitat, you're maintaining diversity, you're keeping the bird population and other animal populations more level or equal. And at the same time, you're fulfilling something that an industry needs.
Sure.
And I really think that that's commendable from your standpoint.
Well, that's all part of forest management and forest health. You keep the forest healthy by managing it.
Yeah.
The only time when I was in my 36 years being an industrial forester before I came to the federal side, the only time you clear cut is when there's some sort of disaster that hits the forest, whether that be a storm, a wildfire. Of course, you always have bugs and disease, which in the South, the southern pine beetle, and now the emerald ash borer, that's devastating. And so a lot of times you do have to clean the slate and start over again.
Yeah.
But when we take a mine site, we're starting with a clean slate and we start over with a new native forest.
It's so fascinating to me that it can be done, and you're shortening the growth cycle because of how you're managing it. I think I remember you mentioning that earlier.
That's correct. We're trying to help Mom Nature fast forward about 80 to 100 years by planting the oaks and the hickories and the chestnuts, because otherwise they wouldn't arrive on the scene until 80 years from now if we planted it today.
Exactly.
So we're trying to help jumpstart Mom Nature and plant these trees that will come on and produce the food for wildlife, the homes for wildlife, and future timber.
I have to ask you, as you gaze into the future, because I'm sure you're always thinking of the future because you always have to have a plant palette. You always have to know where to get your seedlings from. What do you think are some of the overall good things that are going to be coming down the road, but also some of the roadblocks that you might have to overcome since you've been with OSMRE?
Some of the roadblocks, well, you always have politics.
Oh, yeah, well,
And you also have to, a lot of people have been misinformed for years about, well, why are you planting these trees, So why are we planting these trees? That's our future timber product for our future generations. So the trees that I'm planting, I won't ever see them mature. I'll be gone. That's for my children and grandchildren to see and enjoy. Right. Just go back to Flight 93. That's a national park. When you drive in, it's almost a mile from the state highway to the visitor center parking lot. And when you drive through, as you're driving to the visitor center, you look off to your left on that hillside, and you're going to see different age stands of timber because we plant them in blobs. We don't plant them in straight rows. So it doesn't look like a cornfield. It looks like a native forest that's coming on in different ages and stages.
Uh-huh.
So trying to correct misinformation, if you will, that's a lot of what I try to do. And one of the other roadblocks is to go from an abandoned or a barren mine land, all this jungle of junk growing on hard-packed ground, that takes some cash per acre to change that. So you've got to pay for a bulldozer, the trees, the seedlings, and the labor. And then that fourth step is that herbicide spray. None of that comes free. So between government assistance, nonprofits and for-profits, and private landowners, I try to collect the different pots of money, even if it's a little bit in a pot. When you put them all together, now you got something to work with and you can do a successful project.
So what you're saying is it takes a village, not only just the federal government, but it takes a whole bunch of different organizations to create a forest. Just like the diversity in the forest, that's the amount of diversity that you have to have in the funding sources.
That's correct.
The one thing that I remember you talking about was the sources for the plants, that you have to go to the Forest Service first. Is that correct? Where you get your seedlings from?
Well, the Forest Service has kind of gotten out of that. What they did is they started it, and then they taught the different state forestry agencies how to do it.
Okay.
Like Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is very, very fortunate because I think they have 3 tree nurseries within the Division of Forestry. Kentucky has 2. Tennessee has 1. West Virginia closed theirs a couple of years ago. Ohio closed their nursery about 10 years ago. But the good news, Eva, they got a little bit of money and they are opening a pilot nursery.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, that's going on right now. Ohio, I think, had 2 nurseries. They held on to the land because that was state property.
Okay.
So they went back to one of the old nursery sites and, they're going to incubate their seed in a greenhouse and then transfer it out in the field.
Well, that's great.
And when I heard about this, I was doing backflips. This is great news.
Yeah, I'm sure, because not every nursery in a state can grow everything because there's so many. And, I wonder if, and you can answer this for me, but if you're doing something in West Virginia, can you call on Pennsylvania for seed? Can you call on Ohio for seed? Can you call on Maryland for seed? Is that possible?
Absolutely. Every one of these state nurseries knows the other nurseries from the states that join them.
Gotcha.
And they also know the private nurseries, Eva.
Yeah.
So let's say if Pennsylvania can't fill an order, they can contact Virginia, they can contact Kentucky, they can call surrounding states to the private nurseries and the state nurseries to try to fill their orders. It's a great network.
And as far as provenance goes, I would imagine that provenance would take second seat if you're short of something. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because then you're actually assisting migration too. I just did a big talk on assisted migration and people were kind of surprised, but it's an important topic because the interaction between the states and an organization and organizations like yours and organizations that work with yours are actually doing a lot of heavy lifting of getting different plants that you might not have in your seed sourcing or your nurseries and being able to get them from someplace else.
That's true. One other silent partner is the forestry schools in every state.
Okay, gotcha.
They're doing the research a lot of times for those state nurseries, or they've been contracted with a private nursery, and they're looking at trying to get the best genetics that they can from nurseries, from in the field, because they have people that go out and collect seed. Especially these forestry schools, they'll send their grad students out to collect seed from the best of the best trees, bring them back, and they're doing genetic research at the nursery to try to get the best trees for survival.
Yeah. Now, we were talking with 2 gentlemen out from the West Coast, one from British Columbia, one from California, and they were telling us that there's, a real problem with seed, getting enough seed, finding good sources. Once they find a good source, then they mark that area and that's where they go back to, or they start creating their own orchards, which makes a lot of sense because they know what that tree will provide and what kind of genetics that tree has. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really fascinating.
The drawback for that, Eva, is, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there were people that they made their living collecting seed in the fall and winter months.
Something that's...
Yeah, and all of those people have now retired or died.
It's interesting that you're saying that because I was talking to people and students telling them that years ago when I had my flower shop, the train companies would issue licenses to people to glean products along the train tracks. And you could get things for your flower shop like pussy willow and bittersweet and all that kind of stuff. You could get that because they paid, I think it was like $10 for a license through the train company for their right-of-ways. And these people had license. They carried their license with them. And if anybody stopped them, they say, here's my license. And then that's how they made their living. And you tell people that today and they look at you like you're crazy. But now we use sprays. And that was the way people made a good living, going along the train tracks, or that, like you said, collecting seed. How much do they get a pound? They know how much they can pick up.
Exactly.
We were just at a native nursery this past week that grows native trees of the provenance within a certain mileage, and they had this really interesting roller that you push, and it picks up acorns and seeds like sweet gum and all that. The students were fascinated. I mean, they were just blown away that they have these interesting inventions just for helping to pick up seed. And in talking with the two gentlemen from the West Coast, they said, well, number one, there's not a lot of people who know how to collect seed anymore. And number two, there's a shortage of seed. So, I worry about that. I worry about, how are we going to do that? Are we going to have orchards, seed orchards, or are we going to have designated people in different states that are going to be collecting seed on a regular basis? Like you said, the state schools, the forestry schools collecting, do they have enough in the seed bank, et cetera, et cetera? So, yeah.
I don't know. I know when I was in forestry school, when we were volunteered, well, let me back that up. We were voluntold by our professors, that in the fall, they divided us up. Half of us went to the pine nursery and we picked pine cones out of bucket trucks. And the other half, they went on Forest Service land, state forest land, timber company land, whatever. And they were all given 5-gallon buckets and those pecan picking little basket things on a stick. And they were sent out to go pick up, like you just said, walnuts, acorns, different seed.
Yeah.
Bring it back. Buy. You might have had 2 buckets, but you had to keep your seed separated, and then they dump it and went through. That was the first cull. It was to separate it, and then they send it to the nursery, and then they did the float test, and they got rid of the bad seed. It went through several stages before they finally got viable, good seed that would be planted in the seed beds.
Right, or maceration for fruited with a real heavy covering on them. They have to do maceration to get the seed cleaned. That's another thing. That's usually in the springtime when they're going to be doing that with cherries and anything that has a fruity covering on
it. And a cover, that's correct.
It's a pulpy, It's just so fascinating. And I just wonder how many people really know anything about this. And I hope the people that are listening are interested in doing stuff like this.
Well, and one of the things is kind of a glimmer of hope. The Civilian Conservation Corps got some money with this last infrastructure bill that was passed, and I think it's called the Civilian Climate Corps is the new term. But anyway, that's being formed, and young people will be able to have a job. Yeah. And they may be planting trees this year, or this season, they may be picking up seed in the fall, in the winter. So, if you're interested in working in the woods and learning a career in natural resource spectrum, this could be your ticket.
Yeah, I just heard about that when the president was talking last night, that they had created that. And, the IRA certainly will create new jobs, but also encourage people who, as you mentioned, like working outdoors to pursue some of these careers, because I think they're invaluable.
Yes.
Because we don't see it on an everyday basis, we may not even think about it in our lifetime.
Right.
But as horticulturalists, as timber people, as a forester, I'm thinking about it all the time. When I see a seed on the ground, I think, oh my gosh, we can't let it go to waste. But I'm sure there's going to be a squirrel coming by pretty soon.
Yeah, or a bird.
Yeah. Well, this has been really a delight to talk with you again, Cliff. There's just so much I learn when I'm talking with you and hearing about the wonderful things that you're doing. And we look forward to, having you on again when you have some more information that you can impart to us. And again, that site, if anybody's interested in going to find out what kind of activities are happening this spring, and I'm sure you have them in the fall as well, www.osmre.gov/programs/ARRI.
That's correct.
So thank you again, Cliff, and I wish you all the best, and hopefully we'll get a chance to meet soon.
Thank you, Eve. I appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate you having me on your show.
Yep. And again, all the best to you.
Thank you, ma'am. You too, and you and your audience are always welcome to come join us in the field.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
The Plant a Trillion Trees podcast is edited by Andromedan Recordings in Hollywood, California.